What's up, everybody? Welcome to Primetime. I guess I'm your host, Chad Webb, and I'm joined by my wife, Carrie Webb. Normally we have Hunter Chambliss here, but today he is not joining us, because he wasn't able to watch the movies that we're going to discuss. Maybe he will down the line. But today we're doing our second episode of our 61 Days of Primetime 2024. And we're going through the decades from the 30s to the 20s. We picked 6 movies from each decade, adds to 60 because there's 10 decades. And then the very end, we're going to do a live stream watch of one of our favorite horror movies, Halloween from 1978. So we covered the 30s. Now we're on to the 40s. And this is our 1940s episode. We have 6 movies that we're going to discuss today. But first, how's it going, Carrie?
Going great. How are you?
It's going great. It's been a little bit trying to get through some of these movies.
Yeah.
This has become a little bit of a daunting task to get through these 61, but we're still having a lot of fun discovering a lot of movies we haven't seen before. And maybe have only heard of. And I don't know if you guys have or have not heard of these. This will be really fun to see what you guys think in the comments and everything as well. So, stay engaged and let's see what we thought. So without further ado, and at the very end, we are going to rank these. So Carrie, I believe, has her ranking. I have mine. So now we're going to start with the first movie we watched from the 1940s, which was The Ghost Breakers. Carrie, would you like to start with this one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start this one. This is it is technically a horror movie. There are ghosts or a ghost. It is a little bit, it's like a horror movie, but also a romantic comedy, but also a crime drama. It definitely meshes like a few different genres. This one, I wasn't sure about it going in. It was on my watch list of horror movies, so that's why I picked it. Uh, but I wasn't sure what it was really going to be like, especially given that it was partially a romantic comedy. But this one stars Bob Hope, a very, very young Bob Hope. And he was really funny in this movie, I thought. And I thought the female lead, Paulette Goddard, she was fantastic as well. I thought they had great chemistry. Um, and one of the other co-leads, Willie Best, I thought he was a really good actor, although I would say the big fault of this movie, the only thing I didn't like is you could tell by the racial or there was a lot of, it was like kind of a little racist, I feel like. I don't know how you felt about it, Chad. A little bit of like some stereotypes that existed at that time. But it's like what, like Chad and I did a big Disney movie watch, and I felt similarly about this movie that I felt about some of those Disney movies that were like earlier on, where like you're like, at least there's representation, but it's maybe not the best representation that has existed. But I thought overall this was a solid story. I really enjoyed a lot of it. And I would probably watch this one again. What do you think, Chad?
Well, to speak first on the racism aspect, I mean, if you watch a movie from the 1940s, typically it's not going to have the best of intentions. I feel like as far as how people of color are portrayed, which is very unfortunate. Like like Carrie said, if you watch through all the Disney movies and things like that, you're gonna find some like really problematic stuff. In this one, I don't know if I remember any like specific instance of racism, but I'm pretty sure they were there. Although I did really enjoy, you said his name was William Best, Willie
Willie
Best,
Best.
as Alex. I thought he was really good. And the problem I have a little bit actually with his character's inclusion in the movie is that like on the posters, he's never included on the posters, but it feels like he's like a third lead. Like he's like, I guess like the sidekick or whatever, but he's there the entire movie doing everything that they're doing. Um, Even more so trying to recover the guy that gets locked in the trunk, Bob Hope. So yeah, I actually really enjoy. He was one of my favorite parts because I thought he was very funny. And Bob Hope, of course, is funny as well. And I think that goes into one of the strengths of this movie is that it is a really early horror comedy, which I think is like really cool when you have something like that. And then Bob Hope, if you look at like Oscars history, no one has ever hosted as many times as he has. I think it was like 19 times that Bob host. Just call him Bob Host because
Yeah.
he hosts the Oscars all the time or used to. But yeah, this was a really interesting because this was I think the first movie I've seen with Bob Hope in it, or at least the first like big movie where he's like starring in it. And I thought he was very, very funny. There's like a scene where, there's like a whole thing where he thinks he murdered somebody, he didn't actually, and then he like hides in a chest but gets locked in there, and then that's how he ends up on the boat with this woman who just ended up inheriting like a large mansion in, where was it? Do you remember where that mansion
Cuba.
was? Cuba. Um, so they're on a boat, a ship to Cuba, and he ends up on there because he's in the trunk. And it's funny because as soon as they like get it open, he's like doing like this little waddle walk, like as you would, I guess, if you were trapped in a trunk, but not really. You probably really wouldn't walk like that, but he does because it's really funny guy, Bob Hope. And a lot of really great physical comedy and gags and things like that. And of course, it ends up like kind of Scooby Doo at the end, where they go and they're just like, zoinks, and they don't actually say zoinks, but they're like seeing a bunch of like creepy stuff at the house. Yeah, and then I think after that, it just kind of ends up as like a standard haunted house movie. Um, so I think like a lot of it, is really interesting and how it unfolds and how they get to the house, and then after that, it just kind of is just a spooky haunted house movie. And so I would say this one's kind of okay. I would also watch it again at some point. And I would recommend it if you like horror comedies. Um, but I wouldn't say that this was one of the best movies that I've seen recently. So yeah. But it's definitely watchable. Bob Hope's really funny in it. And yeah, do you have anything else to add on the Ghost Breakers?
Nope.
All right, so we'll move on to the next movie, which is The Devil Bat. Ooh, it's like, yeah, The Devil Bat. I don't know. This felt like barely a movie to me. I don't know how you felt about this, but it felt like a monster movie that had like a good idea, but it wasn't holding my attention. It was like I feel like you barely saw the bats, and then they looked really fake when you did, and stuff. I mean, the synopsis of it is kind of interesting, where it's like guy feels wronged by his employers, so he raises these bats and like injects them with stuff that makes them really vicious, and then he does like a little formula into like a lotion that like drives them onto people, and then he tries to get them to attack his enemies, and then he ends up dying himself. Spoiler. Oh yeah, blanket spoiler for all of these movies, of course. So I've already spoiled The Devil Bat for you. I apologize. But yeah, it's very simple, but I just feel like it just wasn't one that was really able to hold my attention, as I said. And you know, it's just, I feel like it's a really interesting concept that just wasn't executed well. I don't know if this is like something that could be remade down the line, or if it has been. I don't even actually know. Um, but it just seems like a kind of a standard monster movie that just wasn't that interesting to me. Um, And yeah, feel like that's all I really have to say about it, to be honest. So I'll pass it on to you. What did you think?
Yeah, I felt pretty similar. I'll go ahead and say this was my least favorite of the 1940s bunch that we watched. I mean, it's fun if you're looking for a Bela Lugosi monster movie, like something that's not Universal monsters. Like, it's a fine one to put on. Like, if you want that, or like a old monster movie. Um, it's got an okay plot, like you said, it's almost like this would have been better as like a half an hour episode of television or something, like just stretching it into a full length movie. There were definitely like pockets where things were moving pretty slowly. Yeah, just I think a good classic example though of like the types of movies that Bela Lugosi was in at this time period, where he's playing the villain. Um, and and yeah, I mean, I would watch it again, I think, but it definitely wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point though about maybe this could have been like a Twilight Zone episode, or like a Tales from the Crypt type of thing, or just some TV episode, or like an X Files episode, rather than um, a whole movie. Even though these movies do run typically like short, this could have been like a 30 to 40 minute thing easily. And maybe it would have felt even better because of the pacing would have worked, I think, a lot better. All right, so we can move on to the next one, which is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. All right, some big names there: Spencer Tracy, Ingrid Bergman. All right, Carrie, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with this one. This is the classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde tale. This is not, I think there's a Universal version. I don't think this is a part of the Universal version, although I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. This one stars Spencer Tracy as Dr. Jekyll slash Mr. Hyde. And it also has Ingrid Bergman. Two of the most incredible actors of the time period, and it shows. I mean, it really like their acting really elevates this movie to like a different place than I think it would have been if other people were in their roles. Just like always watching Ingrid Bergman on the screen is just like such a pleasure. And then I thought Spencer Tracy was just absolutely incredible. Like, I thought his performance was fantastic. And the special effects they used for the transformation were like pretty cool. And you can see how this really influenced horror movies down the line. Like, I felt like a lot of similarities to An American Werewolf in London, which obviously had much better effects in the 80s, but like what they were able to do in the 40s with um, this transformation in this movie, I thought was just really, really cool. Um, so yeah, I really like this movie. What did you think, Chad?
Yeah, honestly, like when I was watching this, I was wondering, I was like, is this one of the older horror movies that was nominated for Best Picture? Because it like has like such a great cast. It's directed by Victor Fleming, who in 1939 had two movies that were nominated for Best Picture and won one with Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. To see like the caliber of filmmaking in this, I was like, was this one of the ones? And it wasn't, but um I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been, because I did think this was pretty incredible. It's one of those things where this story, obviously isn't a new story. It's one that, comes from older times, I think, but it's been adapted so many times that this is just one of the versions. But I don't know, if I go and watch through them all, I would not be surprised if this was the best one, because I think I'd only seen Spencer Tracy later in his career, in like Father of the Bride, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was his last role. um so to see him as like a young guy playing this like dual role of like, you know, the best of humanity or the best of a human and the worst of a human like split, and to have to see him like portray both sides so well, so where he's just a really good guy but then a really creepy guy. And Mr. Hyde does some really bad things in this. Very, very bad. So it really goes there, and it doesn't shy away from things, you know, as far as like a 40s movie would go. Um, but yeah, I feel like, you know, it really goes to the depths of not the depths was it goes to like a place where it doesn't feel cheap. Like it feels like it earns all of the things that happen in the movie. Ingrid Bergman is a fantastic as always, and you know, just really feels like it has something to say about humanity and, you know, the worst of us, and, you know, what we can do if we don't like rein in like the darker sides of us, and stuff. And yeah, there's just a lot you could probably dive deeper into this if you're not reviewing 6 movies in an episode. So I feel like this is probably going to be one of the ones that ranks pretty highly for us. Um, and I would definitely, of course, watch this again. And I kind of want to watch a lot of the other ones now and like see where this falls, because, you know, I think this might be one of the best ones. So um and it's creepy when he turns into Mr. Hyde. Like there's a part where he turns into Mr. Hyde after taking like the potion, and then he stops taking the potion. He's like, I'm never going back there. And then he starts turning into Mr. Hyde, like you know, not at will, but like without even meaning to. And so like the darkness just comes back out for him. And when it does, and like she looks up and it's not Dr. Jekyll but Mr. Hyde staring down at her, it's just creepy as hell. And I just feel like they use like the makeup and the performances and everything so well that it definitely was a very well made movie, and I really liked. Yeah, that being said, we can move on to the next one.
Yes.
All right, so we'll move on to, speaking of cat people, as you're dealing with some rowdy cats or a rowdy
I'm
cat.
I'm trying to get them our own cats out of this room because they don't want to be in here with the door closed. But I want the door closed because I'm trying not to wake up the baby.
Right.
And when I
Well,
open the door, they don't want to come out because they think they're going to get fed in here.
yeah. Well, cat problems, cat people.
Mhm.
So with cat people, I guess I'll start with this one. I really like this one. I thought this one's interesting because this one is a movie that it's almost like what it doesn't show a lot of the times. And I was reading like there's a lot of stuff in the movie that the original director didn't want to include, but the studio wanted more cat stuff. So this is about a woman who believes she is part cat, or she can transform into a cat. Like she comes from Serbia, I believe it is, and her like heritage, like her people can turn into cats. And so I don't know, I'm not really exactly sure like what this plays into as far as like, you know, like women or anything like that, but I know it has a lot to do with kind of like an other status. It has to do with kind of having like a deep like dark secret, or like something about you that you don't think people would accept. There's like a lot of things like that I think that you can dive into with this one. But I do really like how a lot of the times you think that she might turn into a cat or something like that, but instead they kind of show like shadow, or just, you know, kind of linger the camera a lot, you know, where it's like suggesting that something might happen and it doesn't always. Um, and I don't know, I just think this one was like really finely crafted. I think it had a really interesting story, um, of like marriage, like a rocky marriage falling apart, and a woman trying to figure herself out, and like going like back to her roots and things like that. And it's definitely one that I would love to return to get some of those deeper meanings, uh in it more so, as this cat keeps bugging me. I'll pull him up since we're talking about cats if he'll let me.
It's Binks.
Yes. Um
Zachary Binks.
This looks like one of the Panthers that's in the movie, and I kept going like,
Mhm.
"Oh, that's Binks on the screen." Um, but yeah, so, I don't know, yeah, I really felt this was really interesting, really, well shot and framed, and just, like, it felt like every, you know, little, like, look or, like, way something was shot in a different kinda way meant something. And it just feels like one that I'd have to return to really like figure out like, oh, this shot is saying this and things like that. So it felt like a very artistic movie that was very creepy, um, because instead of just having people turn into cats all the time, it just had kind of like shots of like some people who kind of look like they could turn into a cat, if that makes sense. And just kind of the threat of it just felt like really interesting, just the way things were shot. There's like some really cool jump scares, like this one where you're thinking like someone's coming up to someone else, and then there's a bus that just goes "Er," like right in front, and I'm like, oh shit. So yeah, it's really effective at being creepy. So I would say this was one of the creepier, scarier ones that we've watched so far. Um, and I really really like this one. Carrie, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely love this one. Again, this is one where I think the acting was part of its strong suit. Like, oh, there's really three main leads in this movie. And I think they all were just like very convincing, so really well casted for their roles. Um, yeah, like you said, I haven't really done a lot of deeper thinking about the meanings behind this movie. Um, and I'd be curious to, like you said, watch it again and kind of watch it with an eye towards like what are the metaphors in this movie? What is this movie really saying about people and maybe about women specifically, about cats. But yeah, like you said, Chad, I thought it was just beautifully filmed, and this is the only one, and it is the benefit of this movie is that it has a Criterion release that we actually owned and watched, and so it was just, I mean, Criterion just did a beautiful job putting this on Blu-ray. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous, especially compared to some of these other movies. Um, just unfortunately haven't been as well restored, especially on like the streaming platforms where we were streaming them. So just then compare, I mean, this was the most beautiful film that we watched for sure. Um, and I think a lot of that was due to it, we were watching a Criterion release of it, but I think in general it probably was um, the cinematography was probably the best in this movie, probably of all of them. And yeah, just such an interesting movie. It kept us engaged the whole time, and like you said, it was super creepy. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing that you just said at the very end, is that it's probably a combination of like the restoration as well as the cinematography and the choices by the director and things like that. I just think it's an extremely well made movie, extremely well preserved movie. I'm so glad we have the Criterion. That's why I like to collect a lot of those, and I highly recommend it if you can afford it, because they're not cheap. But this one definitely comes with a little booklet, not like a big book, but a lot of them come with little read ups, like where somebody who really knows this movie very well and has thought a lot about it, basically goes through and talks about some of the deeper meanings of things and whatnot. And I was just trying to come up with some of the things that I remembered that they said, but also things that I saw in the movie as well. But yeah, we both really like this one. So now we can move on. And now we're moving on to Dead of Night. Carrie, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, I'll start with this one. This is an anthology movie. I don't know if it's the very first horror anthology, but it's an early one for sure. I think there are 5 stories in this, and they range from they're all relatively short. Some are shorter than others. Um, uh, I don't know. I thought this was just I know it took actually Chad and I a little bit to get into this movie. But it wound up being, I think, so good. Like, I think the better stories are packed toward the end of this movie, and the most famous one is the very last story, besides the wraparound. Um, the last one involves a mannequin. It's a very like the movie Magic, or that Goosebumps book with the puppet.
Mhm.
I think his name is Sid. Overall, I thought this one, some of the stories were really scary. Some of them were really funny. Like, there's one with these 2 golfer guys. It's the second to last one. And that one is hilarious. Yeah, so overall, like, I think we started this movie and we were kind of struggling to get through it a little bit, but then it kind of it grew, at least on me, it grew a ton, and it became definitely like one of my favorites that we actually watched for these 40s movies. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, I think this movie was actually really great, like you said. Um, the reason it took us a little bit to get into is because I think you were just talking about restoration for cat people. And I feel like this one, because we watched it on a streaming service that didn't have subtitles, and because of that, it was just hard to understand what a lot of people were saying. So I was like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get into this at all. Um, and I just didn't know what was going on for a while. And I was like, I think this is an anthology, but when the hell does it start being an anthology? And if you don't understand like who the characters are and like who's telling a story and it's going back and time to each like person who's telling a story and like their story, it can be really hard to get into. And luckily we gave it a bunch of chances, and then we finally were able to actually grasp what was going on and get into it. And I think each of these stories is really really interesting and really either like funny or scary or both. And you see a lot of like things that you would see later on uh in this movie, like the haunted like puppet or whatever, possessed puppet. I mean, we've got Chucky, we got, like you said, Sid. I don't know if that's the one from Goosebumps or if that's just Buffy, because Buffy also has that puppet,
That
that's Sid.
might be Buffy. I might have been
um
thinking Buffy.
yeah. And then just you got Magic with Anthony Hopkins. So you got a lot of different like puppets and puppet things. That's a really good one. Yeah, and then you have the one with the golfers that is really funny, like Carrie was talking about, where I was like laughing like a lot because it's like a bet between 2 guys, and they're playing a golf game, and one guy loses and then he immediately walks into the lake and drowns himself. It's like, whoa, all right. So you lost at golf, and so yep,
Well,
all right. What?
they were playing the golf game to decide which of them would propose to the woman
Yeah.
they were both in love with. But yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that adds a little bit more context to it, but even either way, if you know the context and if you don't, it's still very very funny. And then of course, he as you would, right? He gets haunted by the guy who killed himself, and then they still have like bets going on, which is really funny. And then you have the one that I thought was probably the scariest, was the one with the girl who goes into she goes into like a old nursery, and she sees a little boy who just needs someone to like kind of be close to him and stuff, and so she comforts this boy and has a little moment, and then goes back and then finds out he was dead the entire time. He was a little ghost boy. And that stuff like that scares the shit out of me. Just thinking about meeting someone that you've never seen before, and then you go back and someone goes, "That room's been empty forever," or whatever, and you're just like, "What?" Um, and that one was really effective, I thought. It's like another one with a bus that I'm thinking about. That I don't really remember much from that one actually. It was like the first one. But I think it was just like he was experiencing a lot of deja vu, and then the bus crashed. So you got like stuff like that. And yeah, sorry, I don't want to go through each one of these, but I just wanted to highlight some of the ones that I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's a really interesting anthology, and that's why I picked this one, because I was like, I've heard this is a really good early anthology movie, so I'm really glad that we could actually get into it, and I hope maybe we could get this on Blu-ray or DVD or something at some point, just to be able to watch it with its subtitles and actually engage with it a little bit better. Um, but yeah, I'm glad that you like this one, because I really did too. I'm not like huge on anthologies, but I like a lot of the ones I've seen, and so this is just so cool to see one of the earlier ones. And I'm actually still going to try to get Hunter to watch this, because I know Hunter loves anthologies. So I was watching it like, well, Hunter's not watching this one, so I got to refer it to him, because he would really dig it. So that being said, we can move on to the next one, which is our last one, which is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. This might be like the most famous one that we've talked about so far. I mean, this is the one that it features a universal monster in Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman. And it's has Abbott and Costello, who are very famous in their own right. One of those great like comedy duos. Of course, if you've ever heard Who's on First, that's Abbott and Costello. They have like the sharp wit that they go back and forth with, and just they're very funny together. With uh, Abbott being the straight man and Costello being the little jokester guy, and so it's fun to see them play off of each other. It's fun to see them play off the monsters and things like that. I know there's a lot of people who really really like this one. I would say I was a little bit middle of the road on this one personally, just because like I got really confused, because I'm like, I kind of wish this was a story about them encountering Frankenstein, like either. Well, you know what? I think there might have been a little bit of miscommunication on my part as well, because there were a lot of years in between the original Frankenstein that we covered in the last episode and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. There's been a lot of like Frankenstein movies in between, and different like evolution, I think, of the character. So this character is a little bit different than the one that we saw in the original Frankenstein. Um, and stuff. So I'm just really not sure. But I still probably would have liked just a movie with just of them. But this seems like it's more of Abbott and Costello face Count Dracula, or the Dracula. And I just feel like the title of it made me feel a little bit weird. Plus, they're not called Abbott and Costello in the movie. They're I can't even remember what their names are. Chick and something else.
Wilbur.
Wilbur. Chick and Wilbur. Um, but I know like movies sometimes would be titled that if it's like a comedy duo, that like you want to like highlight this is Abbott and Costello versus Frank or meets Frankenstein. Um, and so I think like I just didn't know what to expect. And the story that we got, I think, was pretty interesting. It's like, Dracula wants to, like, Frankenstein, I guess, is too smart for him. And he's like, we need to make Frankenstein dumber. So we're going to replace his brain with Wilbur's brain, so Costello's brain. It's like he's so dumb. let's put his brain inside of Frankenstein's brain or head. And I thought that was like a pretty funny premise. I think Abbott and Costello are pretty funny in it. Like it's just basically like Costello's kind of like Shaggy from Scooby Doo, where he's just like "Ah," everywhere, and it's just really funny to see him do that. See some of the physical gags. Um, I wouldn't say Abbott and Costello are like my favorite of like comedy duos though, so that I didn't think this was like laugh out loud hysterical the entire run through. And I think if I had had that, it would have been like really funny to me. Like I love like Charlie Chaplin films because a lot of those times I just think like Chaplin just had such a great way of physical comedy that's just not really, unmatched unless you like look at like Buster Keaton or something like that. So like with physical comedy like that, you didn't even really need words because he's mostly like silent. Um, and so a lot of that stuff works for me. For here, just a couple decades later with Abbott and Costello, I just didn't really find their bits like that funny. It's just mostly like we're going to be scared of everything we see, and that's like the only joke that they really have the whole time. But it was still a really interesting story. And I'd like to go through and see some of the other ones because I know they have more than just this one. And then watch more of the Universal Monster movies, just in general, just to get a better vibe for where this actually falls into the mythos of the Universal Monsters and Abbott and Costello and their stuff. So watch more of their stuff to get more of the vibe of like how they actually are. But for a first time watch, I enjoyed it. I just wish I had liked it a lot more than I did. So yeah, how did you feel about this one?
I felt exactly the same way, and I kind of went into it expecting to like it a lot more than I did. And I do feel like I do need to give this one another chance because there were times where I wasn't fully paying attention. Like I was like I think doing some work at the same time. Um, but yeah, honestly, I laughed more at a couple of the other films we watched that I feel like are less horror comedy. Like I laughed more during Dead of Night and during the Ghost Breakers, I think, than this film, which was surprising to me. And I think the plot was fine. But the plot in a lot of the other movies was just so much more compelling and kept my interest a lot more than this one. So yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page with this movie.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's like when you actually get into the movie, like if you watched it when you were younger, maybe you like it a lot more. Or if you have like a parent that like introduced you to it, uh, you probably remember when we were watching some of the earlier Universal Monster movies, there was another thing that you showed me that was really funny, and it felt like kind of like a commercial. Do you remember what that was? It was like we watched Frankenstein, then we watched Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, was it the short film?
Yes,
Yeah, Boo. It's on one of the Universal Monster collections, probably the Frankenstein one.
that was
Yeah,
actually really
that
funny.
was
That
funny.
that
Yeah.
one, and I was surprised because like I don't know why, but it took me a little bit to actually start to watch a lot of older movies, and then when I started to actually get into them, I didn't think that they could be like really funny. I don't know why. I like prejudice against old movies where I'm like they can't really be funny. It's like dad humor, grandpa humor, really. And then like you go and you watch something like The Boo, like you said, and then I'm just like, wow, this one's actually like showed me that like older movies can be like really funny. Like especially like once you get into like stuff like Arsenic and Old Lace and things like that that are just so funny. But yeah, I wish this one was funnier. So maybe on the second watch, we'll get it or something like that.
Yeah.
But that being said, we reached the end of our 1940s discussion of films, our 6 films, and now we're going to do our rankings. So Carrie, do you want to start with your ranking?
Sure, I'll start. My number 6 was The Devil Bat. My number 5 was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. My number 4 was The Ghost Breakers. My number 3 was Dead of Night. My number 2 is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and my number 1 is Cat People.
We have a very similar ranking,
I thought we
but
might.
not quite exactly. My number 6 was also the Devil Bat. At number 5, I had the Ghost Breakers, and then at number 4, I had Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So a little bit of a swap there. And then at number 3, I had Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And number 2, I had Dead of Night. So swap there, but it was very close. Like those two, I think, are both very good for different reasons. And then my number 1 was also Cat People. So I'm glad that, I mean, we are cat people, right? We have like 6 cats. But we also love Cat People, the movie. So I just think that's like really, really fun that was also our number 1 because we differed last time. And I'm not going to get into what we differed on last time. Go check out that video if you haven't, our 1930s video. So you can see all 6 movies that we covered over there, and you can see our rankings of those. Hunter's on that one, and Hunter's going to be on the next video when we cover the 1950s. So, if you want to go back or go forward, you're free to. Thank you very much for watching this, and if you did like this, make sure you like and subscribe to this video and the channel, and watch a lot of our other stuff. We have a lot of brackets and a lot of reviews and stuff that we've done, some games. So check that stuff out. And yeah, if you like this, stay scared.